So thanks very much for joining me here at the World Advanced Therapies and Regenerative Medicine Congress. Domenick, could you tell us a little bit about Putnam Associates?
Putnam was founded in 1988. There are 110 of us. We serve 17 of the top 20 global pharmaceutical companies and a wide range of earlier stage companies, a lot of them based in the Cambridge, Massachusetts biotech cluster. We mainly work on biopharma, though we also do some diagnostic and device work as well.
And how have you noticed your work evolve and change over the last, say, 10 years?
Well, it's interesting that we try to stay ahead of the trends. So we started working on cell and gene therapies back around 2013 when some of the most interesting results started coming out of the University of Pennsylvania, and have been serving a lot of the leading clients since in helping them figure out various aspects of commercialization, whether that's the market assessment overall to help pick which indications to go after, trying to help figure out clinical trial endpoints that will be of most interest. Those endpoints then have a big role on what is the value story and the actual price that makes sense to charge once a product gets approved. And as these products have come closer to market, figuring this out for multiple markets. It's a different story in really each of the European countries and the United States. And actually I have not personally worked on Japan, but similar difference.
Absolutely, and sort of Japan has really felt like it's surged ahead in recent years. Do you feel like there are lessons that we can learn from the Japanese market?
Well, actually, I was going to say that the one that surprises me a lot is the Chinese, not necessarily the market, but just the development. So if you look on clinicaltrials.gov today, of the 280 or so programs you'll see in CAR T space, something like 100 or more of them are actually based from Chinese institutions. I was at ASCO, the oncology conference in the United States 2 years ago, when Legend came and presented their data, and it was really impressive. And some people were skeptical, is this real data, these real trials, but it's held out very well. So it's quite possible that a lot of the real breakthroughs in some of the early runners will come out of Chinese alliances, which I would not have expected, which I don't think anyone would have expected 5 years ago.
No, not at all. And would you say that in recent years, thinking about that explosion, are you working with sort of the smaller startups, or have you had more interaction with, say, the big pharmas of the world?
We've actually worked with both sides of it. So we've worked with a couple of the very prominent startups on helping them figure out, they've raised a lot of money, they've done IPOs. Usually they have a lead product to get that IPO going, but we've worked with them then what are the next 2 or 3 things they're going to develop and helping to build those stories and figure out where to focus. And we've also worked a lot with the larger guys once they do some kind of a deal with the smaller guys to basically figure out all the questions of commercialization, which are much different than anything that's come before. So this doesn't really look like a drug in any respect. There's a lot more people involved, there's a lot more costs and value created by different actors, and figuring out how to sort all of that out, both logistically and with respect to equity, it's very complicated.
It sounds it. When sort of researchers are thinking about scaling up these therapies and maybe making that move into commercialization, what do you think are some of the most common sort of pitfalls and obstacles that they might encounter?
The biggest obstacles? Well, it's interesting that trying to tell interesting stories and avoid confidentiality issues. We were talking to an effort coming out of a leading research university in the United States recently, and they basically think that they need about $5 million to get to the next step, but there's at least 10 or 11 other programs that they know about that have similar technology that are trying to do the same thing. So one of the problems that investors have is who really owns the IP around some of these programs, and is it really defensible? And the path that company has ended up taking, and they're just past Series A, has been to team up with a VC. And so there seem to be specialty VCs that actually are doing matchmaking to help sort out some of the intellectual property problems for a lot of these emerging therapies, which, yes, is a very interesting development.
And is that not something that we'd seen in the space before?
It may have existed in the space before, but I haven't been this close to it or seen it as such a big deal and being so essential to help what seem like very cool concepts with very good preclinical data make it to the next step.
So, this afternoon, I believe you're talking about reimbursement and different models of that. Could you give us a quick overview on the potential different models for reimbursement?
Sure. There's obviously these are very high-priced therapies for the most part. The initial launches in the United States have been in the order of $300,000, $400,000 on the CAR T side. The first of the gene therapies in the United States was about $750,000. In the European context, a couple of the gene therapies that have launched for very niche markets have been, I guess one of them was around 600,000 euros, and the other one was more than $1 million. And so very expensive therapies. In the United States, one of the challenges for the early launches has been the payers aren't quite confident that these price points are correct, and they don't understand if I pay today and the patient doesn't actually respond, shouldn't there be some kind of a value-based agreement, it's called, where I don't have to pay the full freight if the patient doesn't have a response. And so the first CAR T launch in the United States, Kymriah, they actually had a money-back guarantee if a patient hasn't shown a complete response at day 28, which is a very interesting precedent that was set. That was for pediatric ALL. For their second indication, which they received only a few weeks ago, which is diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, DLBCL, they did not offer that money-back guarantee. And that's one where you now have two different CAR Ts because the competitor also has one out there, the Kite one, Yescarta. And so it's interesting that they also have exhibited indication-specific pricing. So Novartis launched for pediatric ALL at around $400,000. But for the second indication, they're more at around $370,000 to be tied with the one that came out first in that indication. So there's a lot of interesting moving pieces here, the indication-specific pricing, the money-back guarantees, and the value-based agreements. And the third one is there are a lot of intermediaries trying to figure out how they can play in this, where to take the risk off the hands of the payers, which often is insurance companies in the US, the intermediary offers to basically buy that obligation and basically take responsibility for the payments, which also may happen on an amortized basis over several years. So a lot of stuff you haven't really seen before in the whole reimbursement arena.
Definitely. And can I press you for your opinion on which one you think we're going to see win out in the end?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of different models. I think ultimately, if you take, if you look at the pipelines for CAR Ts, take multiple myeloma, where there are at least 9 or 10 CAR T programs in development that we know of. At some point, if all of these therapies get approved, you think that payers might have some ability to try and steer the actual business toward the ones that give the best pricing, assuming that there's not a lot of clinical differentiation. And that's also one of the big questions, that in the early CAR Ts, physicians don't see a lot of differentiation between Yescarta and Kymriah so far. And so that's always one of the big wild cards. If there's not clinical differentiation, then payers are probably going to be able to extract bigger rebates and discounts, and the prices of these therapies may come down faster than people expect, which then creates a problem for the investors, right? So I've talked to some of our clients who are in the investment community. They actually have been unhappy that the early therapies have not priced higher. Because to make the returns that they expect from their investments, it implies a higher price point.
So I think we heard from Leerink, I think last week, they think we're going to see the first $1 million therapy. You think the price is only going to get higher?
Glubera was already launched at more than $1 million, and that was the first gene therapy in Europe. It only ever had one patient. It was on the market for 5 years, and then it was withdrawn from the market. So that was sort of an odd case, because the value proposition was not as established as you might want, especially for a therapy that expensive. But we've already been there, and I think another question you're raising is, as the data gets better and better, even if a therapy launched at a certain level, as it treats maybe earlier stage patients, and if there's a longer track record, does that create a value story that allows manufacturers to argue they should have higher pricing? And that's certainly something a lot of the investment community is hoping for. So if you take the case of, say, hemophilia gene therapy, when those price, it's going to be a great answer for a lot of severe patients. but you only have a certain amount of data showing how long the response lasts. Once you have 10 years of data, you're showing that you're replacing expense that might be on the order of like $8 or $9 million. So it seems implausible that the price is going to go that high, but it might be a decent argument that the price ought to be higher than whatever the launch price was.
And obviously payers will be looking ahead and thinking about
Payers
that.
will not want to, they will not agree with the story at all, so it'll be an interesting fight.
And how have you, I don't know how much experience you have on this, but have you noticed differences in how payers are assessing how much a therapy is worth around the world?
So in the U.S. context, I guess, so in the U.S. context, there's a lot of private insurance. And depending how sophisticated the actors, some of them have very sophisticated approaches to this. Some of them have taken the approach of going to groups like ICER, which is the kind of a emerging U.S. equivalent of NICE in the UK, that provides economic assessments and helps give benchmarks what a price point might be. But a lot of payers are kind of throwing up their hands. It's onesie-twosie patients right now, so they're basically just paying whatever the list price is when it's approved. But they are sort of flummoxed by the whole thing. In the European context, there's more of a question of how the clinical package fits with technical assessment. And so one of the big challenges for manufacturers is you got to do your trial right to set yourself up for that comparison in the best possible way. And so one of our frequent project types right now is helping to look at a country like France and understand how your package is going to be evaluated, help advise clients on how to go talk to the authorities to make sure you have the right endpoints, which will make all the difference in what the ultimate pricing is.
Absolutely. And in the future, how do you think the role of consultants like yourselves will change to fit into this new model of therapy?
Yeah, I think the substance of what we work on is bound to change, but a lot of what we do will continue to be supporting the basic pillars of understanding how many patients there are, understanding where in therapy a new therapy is likely to fit best, helping to build value stories based on expected outcomes and comparison against the right standard of care comparators, and then helping to solve the logistics of it all. So once you roll the therapy out, do you need people on site? How do you go to a new hospital, a new institution that's doing, say, a CAR T, and help them understand the economics and put in place the systems required to get the product made? You have to extract the cells, do the apheresis, send it off for manufacturing, get it back. So just physical logistics on one side and the reimbursement logistics on the other, because hospitals don't want to take on a huge debt burden. So, which is actually, a lot of people looked at the story of Provenge, and one of the biggest problems with that example was that they asked oncology practices to basically float $60,000 of financing for a long period of time as part of their launch model. And they ultimately solved that, but that was one of the big hurdles for early adoption.
Wow, and I mean, I suppose that's one way of spreading the cost, but who's going to shoulder that in the future? Where's that going to eventually lie?
It is interesting. I mean, the way all these markets are supposed to work is you launch a new therapy, it has patent protection for a certain period of time, and then you have generics that are available. And so right now, there's a lot of experimentation on how biosimilars will play out, biosimilars being much cheaper than originator products. And you would assume, especially with all the competition out there, that you may see something similar with the likes of CAR Ts and gene therapies, with the caveat that the next generation keeps getting better and better. So all these early CAR Ts, if you end up having, for instance, an off-the-shelf CAR T, that might completely get rid of all the older ones. And you just, it's hard to gauge exactly where the technology will go, but it's this constant tug of war between pricing driven by competition, but value protection driven by patent laws. And it seems pretty clever on the overall scheme of things. Yes, there's a big burden from healthcare costs, but again, these things should go generic, and at some point the patents wear out, so that if you can do it safely and efficaciously, then there should be much cheaper therapies.
And do you think that is the future of this industry? Do you think we're going to see these off-the-shelf therapies for less money, or do you think it's just going to keep going up?
No, I think you will end up. I think the cost of healthcare is going to be comparable, but what that healthcare delivery is going to keep getting better and better. So I think you're going to have a lot of cures in the next several years that are going to be mind-blowing. And really, again, I think society has gotten it about right in terms of incentivizing the innovation that's really leading to this incredible revolution. And this is really we're just at the inflection point. There's just so much interesting stuff happening right now.
Fantastic. Well, Domenick, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.